Get that kid out of here now. The words cut through the air of the park like a blade, transforming the tranquil atmosphere into a tense scene. A middle-aged woman, blonde and well-dressed, was angrily pointing at a black teenager who was sitting calmly on a bench. Could this innocent moment turn into a nightmare? Stay tuned to Black Voices to uncover the shocking truth. She was holding the phone so tightly that she seemed about to break it, her voice loud enough to attract the attention of everyone around. But the boy, apparently confused, just stared at her, not understanding what he had done to provoke such anger. On the other side of the park, some children were playing, and couples were walking their dogs, but everyone was beginning to notice what was going on. The woman, later identified as Catherine Miller, a resident of an affluent neighborhood in the city of Stamford, Connecticut, kept shouting, "He's been here for hours, clearly up to something. This place is for families, not for people like this." She hesitated for a moment, but the contempt in her voice was unmistakable. Want to know who this boy really is? Keep watching Black Voices for a twist you won't believe. The teenager, who went by the name Jamal Anderson, could hardly believe his ears. He was just waiting for his mother to come and pick him up. Jamal was a 15-year-old boy, known for his quiet demeanor and good grades at school. He spent weekends with his mother, Federal Judge Linda Anderson, one of the most respected figures in the region. Jamal liked to visit the park while he waited, a place that brought peace and good memories. But that day, he felt his world turn upside down. Catherine, in her uncontrolled rage, had already dialed 911. "Yes, there's a suspicious individual in the park. He looks dangerous. I think you'd better send a car." Her description was full of prejudice disguised as concern. Meanwhile, Jamal remained on the bench, motionless, with his hands in front of him, as his mother had always taught him. He knew that sudden movements could be misinterpreted. Fear grew in his chest, but he tried hard to stay calm. Minutes later, police sirens echoed through the park. 3 police cars arrived quickly, their red and blue lights flashing. All eyes turned to Jamal. The tension in the air was palpable. He knew he had to be careful. Standing up slowly, with his hands still visible, he tried to explain, "Gentlemen, I'm just waiting for my mother. I've done nothing wrong." But the policeman didn't seem inclined to listen. Catherine took the lead, gesturing and pointing fervently. "He was here alone, hanging around the families. I told him to leave, but he refused." Her voice sounded like someone who believed she was saving the day. The leader of the police team, Sergeant Blake, was a burly, serious man. He asked for Jamal's documents. Without ID, because he was a minor, he tried to explain again that he was waiting for his mother. However, before the situation could escalate any further, a distinct sound interrupted the moment, the roar of a fast-approaching engine. A black sedan stopped abruptly in the parking lot. When the car door opened, a tall woman with an imposing air and firm steps got out of the vehicle. Linda Anderson had arrived. Linda Anderson's arrival was like a silent storm. Wearing a black blazer and with her hair impeccably tied back, she walked with the authority of someone who was used to facing high-risk situations. But this time, it wasn't a legal case that demanded her attention, it was something much more personal. As the policeman and Catherine stared at her in confusion, Linda ignored the woman completely and headed straight for Jamal. "Are you all right, son?" Her voice was firm but full of concern. Jamal nodded slowly, but the relief in his eyes was evident. He knew that his mother would not only protect him but would also resolve the whole situation in an exemplary manner. Catherine, who initially looked perplexed, quickly recovered her superior tone. "Who do you think you are to interrupt like that? That boy was clearly causing trouble," and Linda raised her hand, signaling that she didn't want to hear anymore. Her piercing gaze made Catherine flinch, her words dying in her throat. "I'm Linda Anderson," she began, turning to the officers and speaking with her calmness that contrasted with the tension in the air. "Federal judge, and this one," she pointed at Jamal, "is my son. Now, can someone explain to me why my son is being interrogated in a public park as if he were a criminal?" The officers stood motionless, as if the ground had disappeared beneath their feet. Sergeant Blake sniffed, trying to buy time to formulate an answer. Your Honor, we received a call alleging suspicious behavior, and so, Linda interrupted, her voice becoming sharper. Suspicious behavior? Waiting for Mom at a bench is now considered suspicious? As Blake tried to answer, Catherine, still clinging to her good citizen stance, intervened again. I was only trying to protect the families here. This park is no place for, she hesitated, but the meaning implicit in her words was clear. Linda turned slowly towards her, her eyes sparking with indignation. No place for what? For black teenagers? Because that's exactly what you're implying, and I won't stand for it. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine's gaze began to waver, and she stumbled over her own words as she tried to justify herself. No, I didn't mean that. Linda stepped forward, her presence completely dominating the scene. When you decided to call the police based solely on the color of his skin, you weren't trying to protect anyone. You were acting out of prejudice, and it's exactly this kind of behavior that turns simple situations into tragedies. The crowd that had formed around the incident was completely attentive. Some began recording with their cell phones, capturing every word. It was clear that Linda was not only defending Jamal but trying to educate everyone present about the destructive impact of racism. As Catherine looked increasingly uncomfortable, Linda turned to the officers again. I want to know, Sergeant, what measures do you take to ensure that your actions are not influenced by biased calls like this? Because what I've seen here today isn't policing, it's discrimination. Blake, clearly uncomfortable, replied hesitantly. We follow the protocols, Your Honor. There's no intent to discriminate. Linda raised an eyebrow and interrupted again. Protocols? And those protocols include approaching teenagers like my son without any concrete evidence of wrongdoing? Do you understand what you could have caused here today? One wrong decision, one misinterpreted move, and it could have ended tragically. The crowd seemed to absorb every word, some nodding in agreement. Even Jamal, who had previously felt small and vulnerable, began to feel strengthened by his mother's unwavering presence. Linda, now visibly indignant, pointed at Catherine once again and said, firmly, and you need to reflect on what you've done here today, because your actions weren't just irresponsible, they were dangerous. You may not have realized it, but your words carry weight, and today, they could have cost you dearly. The woman lowered her head, unable to hold Linda's gaze. The crowd remained silent, the weight of the situation still hanging in the air. But Linda wasn't finished. She put her hand on Jamal's shoulder and, in a calmer but equally resolute voice, concluded, this isn't going to end here. I'm going to make sure changes are made, both to prevent situations like this and to educate those who need it. Linda Anderson wasted no time. After making sure Jamal was okay and reprimanding Catherine in front of everyone, she knew she had to act so that this incident wasn't just another case of prejudice swept under the carpet. Sergeant Blake, she began, her tone authoritative but controlled, I want all the details of the call you received, the recording, the report, everything. This will be forwarded to the Police Supervision Department for a full investigation. The sergeant hesitated, but Linda continued. And you, she turned to Catherine, who was still static, holding her bag as if it were a shield, you need to understand that your actions have consequences. This isn't just a park for people you deem fit, this is a public space, and my son had every right to be here. Your false accusation could have ended much worse, and I won't let that go unnoticed. The crowd watched in silence, absorbing every word. Some began to murmur amongst themselves, and it was clear that public opinion was on Linda's side. Catherine, on the other hand, looked smaller by the moment, unable to sustain the weight of the situation she had created. I was just worried, Catherine finally murmured, her voice weak and shaky. It didn't seem right. Linda stepped forward, her gaze steady. Worried about a boy sitting on a bench, or was it the color of his skin that bothered you? Because, frankly, nothing about my son's behavior justified your reaction, nothing. Catherine shook her head but said no more. She seemed unable to argue against the force and logic of Linda's words. Meanwhile, Jamal, still processing everything, watched the crowd around him. There was a mixture of looks, some curious, others sympathetic, and a few clearly uncomfortable with the scene. He knew his mother was fighting for him, but he also felt the weight of being the center of attention. Linda then turned to the crowd. To those of you watching, I want you to know that situations like this are not uncommon. Young black men face it every day. They are judged on their appearance, criminalized for no reason, and sometimes these interactions end tragically. This needs to stop. The silence was broken by a few murmurs of approval. An older woman who was in the front row of the small crowd nodded. "She's right," the woman said, her voice strong. "I've seen things like this happen before. Someone needs to speak up." Linda thanked her with a nod and turned her attention back to the policeman. "I hope everyone here has learned something today. The color of a person's skin shouldn't define how they're treated, and I assure you that I will not rest until real changes are made, both in this community and beyond." The impact of her words was evident. The police officers began to back away, clearly aware that the situation was no longer under their control. Catherine tried to leave discreetly, but Linda called her back. "Not so fast," she said, her voice firm. "I'd like to talk to you in private." Reluctantly, Catherine stayed, and the crowd began to disperse. Linda guided Jamal to the car, but not before turning again to those present. "Don't let situations like this go unnoticed. Record it, report it, and above all, educate those around you, because change starts with us." As soon as they got into the car, Jamal finally broke the silence. "Mom, do you think she'll really learn anything from this?" His voice was charged with emotion, a mixture of hope and doubt. Linda looked at him through the rearview mirror as she started the car. "I don't know, Jamal, but what I do know is that the world only changes when people aren't silent. Today, you were the victim, but you were also the voice that started something bigger. Never forget that." The black Corolla left the park, but the impact of that scene would continue to reverberate. Linda knew that this was only the beginning. She had plans, and none of them involved letting Catherine or the police get away with their actions. Linda was not willing to let the situation dissolve into oblivion. That evening, when she got home, she sat down at the kitchen table with her laptop and began to write a detailed report of what had happened. Every word was carefully chosen, because she knew she wasn't just fighting for Jamal but for all the young black people who have ever been victims of unfair prejudice. Meanwhile, Jamal went upstairs to his room, but he couldn't sleep. He replayed the events in his mind, feeling a mixture of relief and revolt. His mother's firm presence in the situation had protected him, but he knew that not all young black men were so lucky. He stared at the ceiling, wondering how he could make a difference. The next morning, Linda called the city's legal department. As a judge, she knew she might face resistance, but she was determined to ensure that Catherine's false complaint was taken seriously. For her, this wasn't just about Jamal, it was about holding those who perpetuate prejudice accountable. A few days later, Linda received a call. "Judge Anderson, this is the police department. We'd like to discuss the incident in the park." The voice on the other end sounded hesitant. Linda accepted the meeting and showed up with an imposing posture. At the meeting, the police chief, visibly uncomfortable, tried to minimize what had happened. "Judge, we believe it was a misunderstanding. Mrs. Miller was only trying to protect the community." Linda immediately cut off the justification. "Protect from what? From a teenager sitting on a bench? That kind of excuse only perpetuates the problem. I want actions, not words." She demanded mandatory racial awareness training for the entire police force and a review of policies for taking complaints based on suspicion alone. In addition, Linda officially filed a complaint against Catherine for false reporting. Meanwhile, the story began to gain attention on social media. Witnesses in the park had recorded the incident, and the videos went viral. Linda's firm stance and Jamal's vulnerability touched thousands of people. Community groups began to mobilize, using the situation as an example of everyday racism that needed to be tackled. Catherine, now publicly exposed, found herself at the center of a storm of criticism. Under pressure, she approached Linda to apologize. Linda welcomed her but made it clear that an apology would not erase the damage done. "I hope this is a learning moment for you, Catherine," said Linda, "because the consequences of your actions could have been tragic. It's not just about my son, it's about everyone who has ever suffered from prejudice." That conversation marked the beginning of a new chapter. Catherine was sentenced to do community service in an educational program about racial prejudice. Linda and Jamal decided to attend one of the meetings where Catherine had to listen to stories of people who had suffered from discrimination. In the end, Jamal also spoke. His voice was firm but charged with emotion. "I hope everyone here learns something, because I shouldn't have to fight to prove that I deserve to exist in peace, no one should." The impact was profound. Catherine cried, promising to change her way of thinking. Jamal saw it as a small step in a bigger struggle. Over time, changes began to appear. The local police adopted the measures demanded by Linda, and the story inspired other communities to do the same. Jamal, now more confident, started taking part in school debates on equality, using his experience to educate other young people. "You turned something painful into a platform for change," Linda told him at a family dinner. "I'm very proud of you." And so, a simple afternoon in the park became the catalyst for something much bigger. Linda and Jamal knew that there was still a lot to be done, but they also knew that every small victory was a step in the right direction. If this story has moved you and made you think, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and comment on what you thought. Stories like this remind us of the importance of facing prejudice head-on. Subscribe to Black Voices to follow more narratives that challenge and inspire. See you in the next video.